The Galactic Council had existed for 12,000 years before humanity crawled out of the darkness of their lonely solar system and made first contact. In all that time, across all the species that had risen and fallen, joined and departed, the Council had never encountered anything quite like the humans. Ambassador Crystal of the Vorthan Collective was the first to notice it. She had spent 300 years studying new species as they were brought into the fold of galactic civilization. She had seen warriors and pacifists, hive minds and radical individualists, beings of pure energy and creatures of solid rock. But humans were different in a way she could not quite put into words. The first sign came during the initial trade negotiations. The humans had been offered a standard entry package, the same one given to every new species for the past 8,000 years. It included basic technology transfers, trade route access, and a small colony world in an unremarkable system. Every species before them had accepted it with gratitude. The humans said no. Not because the offer was bad, not because they had a better alternative. They said no because the collective's representative had mispronounced their species' name during the opening ceremony. He had called them humans instead of humans. It was a tiny error, one that any reasonable species would have overlooked or gently corrected. The humans walked away from a deal worth trillions of credits over a pronunciation error. Crystal had watched the whole thing unfold with growing confusion. She had pulled up every psychological profile, every behavioral model, every analytical framework in the Council's vast databases. None of them could explain what she had witnessed. The closest concept she could find was wounded pride, but that did not capture the strange intensity in the human ambassador's eyes as he had gathered his papers and walked out of the room. That was when she first heard the word spite. She had to look it up in the human linguistic databases. The definition was simple enough: a desire to hurt, annoy, or offend someone, often at cost to oneself. But the more she read, the more she realized that the definition did not capture the true nature of the concept. Spite was not just an emotion. It was a driving force. It was a fire that burned even when there was no fuel left. It was the willingness to suffer just to make sure someone else suffered more. The Council had no equivalent concept. The Vorthan had words for revenge, for justice, for punishment, but all of those were rational. They were about restoring balance, about teaching lessons, about preventing future harm. Spite had no such purpose. Spite was about inflicting pain for the sake of inflicting pain, even when it hurt the one inflicting it. Crystal filed her report with growing unease. She recommended that the Council proceed with caution in all future dealings with humanity. Her superiors read the report, noted her concerns, and promptly ignored them. After all, what could one young species do against the combined might of the Galactic Council? The answer came 3 years later, when the hegemony of Krath decided to test humanity's resolve. The Krath were an old species, one of the founding members of the Council. They had built their empire on conquest and intimidation. They had crushed 100 species beneath their heel and absorbed dozens more into their collective. They looked at the humans and saw nothing but another weak, primitive species ripe for exploitation. The Krath ambassador arrived at the human colony world of New Brisbane with a simple message: submit or be destroyed. It was the same ultimatum they had delivered to countless species before. Most surrendered immediately. Those who fought were quickly overwhelmed by the Krath's superior numbers and technology. The humans did neither. Instead of surrendering, they broadcast the Krath ambassador's message to every human world, every human ship, every human colony in the galaxy. And then they did something that no species had ever done before. They laughed. The laughter spread across human space like a wave. It echoed through space stations and colony domes, through military bases and civilian settlements. It was not the nervous laughter of fear, nor the cruel laughter of mockery. It was something else entirely. It was the laughter of people who had just been told they should be afraid and had decided instead to be amused. The Krath fleet arrived at New Brisbane expecting a quick victory. They found something else entirely. The humans had turned the entire planet into a fortress, not because they thought they could win. Their own military analysts had given them a 12% chance of survival. They had fortified the planet because someone had told them they could not. They had built bunkers and weapons platforms and shield generators not out of hope for victory, but out of pure, burning spite. The battle lasted 18 months. The Krath threw everything they had at New Brisbane. They bombarded it from orbit. They landed ground troops by the millions. They used chemical weapons and biological agents and weapons that had been banned by galactic convention for thousands of years. The humans held. Not because they were stronger, not because they had better technology. They held because giving up would have meant letting the Krath win. And the humans would rather die, would rather watch their world burn to ash, than give the Krath the satisfaction of an easy victory. Crystal watched the battle unfold from the Council observation post. She saw the human defenders fight with a ferocity that defied all logic. She saw them launch suicide attacks against Krath positions, not to achieve tactical objectives, but simply to kill as many enemies as possible before they died. She saw them rig their own hospitals to explode when the Krath tried to capture them. She saw them fight with knives and rocks when they ran out of ammunition, not because they thought they could win, but because they refused to stop fighting. By the time the battle ended, New Brisbane was a burned-out husk of a world. 80% of the human population was dead. The remaining 20% were wounded, starving, or both. By any rational measure, the Krath had won. But the Krath had lost 60% of their invasion fleet. They had lost 3 of their 5 planetary assault carriers. They had lost their supreme commander and most of his senior staff. They had lost more soldiers in 18 months than they had lost in their previous 300 years of conquest combined. And most importantly, they had lost their reputation for invincibility. The galaxy watched New Brisbane burn, and it learned something new about humanity. It learned that humans did not fight to win. They fought to make sure that anyone who fought them would pay a price so terrible that victory would taste like ash in their mouths. That was spite, and the galaxy had never seen anything like it. In the weeks that followed, Crystal interviewed the surviving human defenders. What she found disturbed her deeply. They spoke of their ordeal not with trauma or regret, but with a strange kind of pride. They had lost everything: their homes, their families, their world, and yet they smiled when they talked about the Krath ships burning in orbit. One old soldier, his body covered in scars from chemical burns, put it simply. They thought we would beg for mercy. They thought we would kneel. Instead, we showed them what it costs to make an enemy of humanity. Every ship we destroyed, every soldier we killed, every day we held them off, that was our victory. They may have won the battle, but they will never forget what it cost them. Crystal asked him if it was worth it. The deaths, the destruction, the ruin of everything they had built. The old soldier laughed, a sound that held no humor at all. "You ask the wrong question," he said. "The question is not whether it was worth it to us. The question is whether it was worth it to them. And I promise you it was not. They will think twice before attacking another human world. They will remember New Brisbane. They will remember us. And that is all we ever wanted." The aftermath of New Brisbane sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Krath hegemony had won their battle but lost something far more valuable. Their subject species, the dozens of civilizations they had conquered over millennia, watched the recordings of the siege and began to ask questions they had never dared ask before. If the humans could make the Krath bleed like that, what else was possible? Ambassador Crystal was promoted to Chief Analyst for Human Affairs. It was not a position anyone wanted. Studying humans had become the most frustrating job in the entire diplomatic corps. Every model, every prediction, Every carefully constructed theory fell apart when applied to human behavior. She assembled a team of the Council's finest minds: psychologists, sociologists, military strategists, game theorists. Together, they spent 2 years building a comprehensive model of human spite. They studied human history, going back thousands of years to their home world. What they found was terrifying. Spite was not a new development. It was woven into the very fabric of human civilization. They found the story of a human who had spent 40 years of his life destroying the career of a judge who had wronged him in his youth. They found the tale of a nation that had fought a decades-long war for a strip of land worth nothing, just because their ancestors had died there. They found accounts of humans who had bankrupted themselves, destroyed their own families, ruined their own lives, all to prove a point to someone who had stopped caring long ago. The researchers found a human saying that captured the essence of spite perfectly. "I would not mind dying in poverty if I knew my enemy would die in misery." Crystal presented her findings to the Council in a closed session. The chamber was silent as she laid out the evidence, case after case of humans making irrational choices, damaging themselves just to damage others more. When she finished, the Council chamber remained quiet for a long time. Finally, Grand Arbiter Thas of the Endless Collective spoke. He was the oldest being in the chamber, a creature of pure thought who had existed for 6,000 years. "You are telling us," he said slowly, "that this species will hurt themselves to hurt others, that they will accept their own destruction if it means destroying their enemies as well." Crystal nodded. "Not just accept it, Grand Arbiter, they will embrace it, they will celebrate it, they have songs about it. Heroes who died taking their enemies with them are honored above those who lived in victory." The Grand Arbiter was quiet for another long moment. Then he said something that would be recorded in the Council archives for eternity. "Then we must never give them a reason to spite us." But it was already too late for the Krath. In the 3 years since New Brisbane, humanity had been quietly building. They had taken the burning ruins of their colony world and turned it into a monument. They had buried their dead in mass graves that could be seen from orbit, each one marked with a simple inscription: "We did not surrender." More importantly, they had been talking to the Krath subject species. The humans did not offer freedom. They did not promise liberation or protection. Such promises would have been beyond their ability to keep. Instead, they offered something much simpler. They offered to teach spite. The Krath discovered this when the Rien Collective, one of their oldest and most docile subject races, suddenly stopped working. Not in protest, not in rebellion. They simply stopped. Every Rien on every world controlled by the Krath sat down where they stood and refused to move. They did not make demands. They did not negotiate. They simply stopped functioning as a workforce. The Krath tried everything. They tried threats. They tried violence. They tried executing random Rien to encourage the others. Nothing worked. The Rien had learned the fundamental lesson of spite: if you are willing to suffer, you can make your enemy suffer more. The Krath economy began to collapse. The Rien had been their primary labor force for 2,000 years. Without them, factories stopped producing. Farms went unharvested. Ships went unrepaired. The mighty Krath hegemony, conquerors of 100 worlds, was being brought to its knees by a species that had simply decided to do nothing. And then the other subject species started watching and learning. The Vreen were next. They were a species of engineers responsible for maintaining the Krath fleet. One day, without warning, every Vreen engineer walked away from their posts. They did not sabotage anything. They did not steal anything. They simply left. And when the Krath tried to maintain their own ships, they discovered that the Vreen had made everything just slightly wrong. Every manual had subtle errors. Every diagram was just different enough from reality to be useless. Every system had been designed to be impossible to understand by anyone except the Vreen. The Krath fleet began to fall apart. Ships lost power. Weapons systems failed. Navigation computers gave incorrect coordinates. The mightiest war machine in the galaxy was being destroyed not by weapons, but by spite. Crystal watched all of this unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination. She had studied spite in theory. Now she was watching it in practice, spreading across the galaxy like a virus. Species that had been conquered for millennia were learning that they did not need to win to make their conquerors lose. She requested a meeting with the human ambassador. His name was James Chen. He was a small man by human standards, with graying hair and a quiet smile that never quite reached his eyes. He agreed to the meeting without hesitation. They met in a neutral space station, in a conference room with windows that looked out on the stars. Crystal had prepared 100 questions. She asked only one. Why? Ambassador Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, and for the first time the smile reached his eyes. Because they thought we would just accept it, he said. They thought we would surrender or die or both. They thought they could take our world and we would learn our place. They were wrong. But you lost New Brisbane, Crystal said. You lost millions of your people. How is that not accepting defeat? Chen shook his head. We lost a battle, but we made sure they lost much more. We made sure that every species in the galaxy knows that attacking humanity comes at a price. We made sure that the Krath subject races know that their masters can bleed. We did not win, but we made sure that the Krath did not really win either. That is spite, Crystal said. Yes, Chen agreed. That is spite, and it is the greatest weapon humanity has ever created. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. For a long moment he stared out at the stars in silence. Let me tell you something about humans, he said at last. We evolved on a world that was constantly trying to kill us. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, our own kind. We should have gone extinct 100 times over, but we did not. Do you know why? Crystal said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Because we refused to die quietly, Chen said. Because every time something tried to destroy us, we fought back. Not because we thought we could win. Sometimes we knew we could not. We fought because we would not give our enemies the satisfaction of an easy victory. We fought because making them suffer for trying to hurt us was more important than our own survival. He turned to face her again. That is spite. It is not rational. It is not logical. It is not efficient. But it works. It has kept humanity alive for 200,000 years, and it will keep us alive for 200,000 more. Because no matter what happens, no matter how badly we lose, our enemies will know that they will pay a price for hurting us, and that price will always be more than they expected. The fall of the Krath hegemony took another 5 years. It was not a quick death, but a slow one, death by 1,000 cuts, each one delivered by a species that had learned to embrace spite. The final blow came when the Krath home world went dark, not from invasion, not from bombardment. The power simply stopped flowing. Every Krath city, every military installation, every life support system on the planet shut down simultaneously. Investigation revealed that the Krath's enslaved maintenance caste had spent 50 years preparing for that moment. They had hidden backdoors in every system, buried kill switches in every power grid, and waited patiently for the signal to activate them all. When asked why they had waited so long, their leader gave a simple answer. We wanted to make sure they would fall far enough to hurt. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss the human problem. It was the largest gathering in Council history. Representatives from over 3,000 species filled the Great Chamber, all of them terrified of the same thing. Spite was spreading. It had started with the Krath subject races, but it had not stopped there. Other species, ones who had never been conquered by the Krath, were beginning to adopt spite-based strategies. Trade disputes that would once have been settled through negotiation were now ending in economic destruction. Minor insults were being answered with disproportionate retaliation. The careful balance that had kept the galaxy stable for thousands of years was beginning to crack. Grand Arbiter Thas called the session to order. His voice, carried across the chamber by ancient technology, held a weight that silenced every being present. "We face a crisis unlike any in our history," he said. "The concept of spite, introduced to this galaxy by humanity, threatens to unravel the foundations of our civilization. We must decide how to respond." The proposals came quickly. Some demanded that humanity be expelled from the Council. Others called for their quarantine, isolation from the rest of the galaxy, until they could be cured of their destructive tendencies. A few of the more militant species suggested that the only solution was the complete destruction of the human race. Ambassador Chen sat quietly through it all, his face unreadable. Finally, when the debate had run its course, the Grand Arbiter turned to him. "Ambassador Chen, you have heard the proposals. What does humanity say in its defense?" Chen stood slowly. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species, each one waiting for his response. "Nothing," he said. The chamber erupted in confusion. The Grand Arbiter raised a hand for silence. "Explain," he demanded. Chen's smile returned, thin and cold. "We do not need to defend ourselves. We have done nothing wrong. We taught the oppressed how to fight back against their oppressors. We showed the weak that they did not have to accept their weakness. If the Council considers that a crime, then the Council has revealed what it truly values." "You have destabilized the entire galaxy," the Vorthan representative shouted. "No," Chen replied calmly. "We have destabilized the systems of control that kept billions of beings in chains. We have shown them that they have power, even when they have nothing else. If that frightens you, perhaps you should ask yourself why." The chamber fell silent again. Chen continued. "You speak of quarantining us, of destroying us. You are welcome to try, but I want you to understand something before you do. Humanity has spent its entire history learning to spite. We have spite in our blood. We have spite in our bones. If you come for us, we will not surrender. We will not beg. We will make you pay such a price for our destruction that the galaxy will remember it for the next 10,000 years." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The Krath thought they could crush us. Look at them now. Their empire is ash. Their species is broken. They won their battle and lost everything else. Ask yourselves, is destroying humanity worth becoming the next Krath?" The vote that followed was not even close. The proposal to take action against humanity was defeated by a margin of nearly 90%. Not because the Council had been convinced by Chen's arguments, not because they believed humanity was innocent. They voted against it because they were afraid. After the session ended, Crystal found Chen in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. She stood beside him in silence for a long moment. "You knew they would vote that way," she said finally. "You knew they were too afraid to act against you." "Yes," Chen admitted. "Does it bother you that you are feared instead of respected?" Chen was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "We learned a long time ago that respect without fear is ignored. Fear without respect is temporary, but fear and respect together can change the world. The galaxy did not respect us when we arrived. They saw us as primitives, as savages, as a curiosity to be studied and exploited. Now they fear us. In time, perhaps, they will learn to respect us as well. And if they do not?" Chen smiled again, that thin, cold expression that Crystal had come to recognize. "Then they will continue to fear. Either way, they will not ignore us. They will not dismiss us. They will not think they can take from us without consequence. And for humanity, that is enough." Thought about that for a long time after Chen left. She thought about the Krath, reduced from conquerors to beggars. She thought about the subject races, suddenly discovering power they had never known they possessed. She thought about the Council, paralyzed by fear of what humanity might do if provoked. And she thought about spite, that strange human concept that had no place in the careful calculus of galactic civilization. It was irrational, it was destructive, it was wasteful and foolish and dangerous. And yet somehow it worked. That night, alone in her quarters, Crystal began to write. She wrote about spite and power, about fear and respect, about the strange species that had stumbled into the galaxy and changed everything. She wrote about the Krath, who had thought themselves invincible, and the subject races who had discovered they were not. She wrote about the Council, paralyzed by fear of what humanity might do, and the new order that was slowly emerging from the chaos. Most of all, she wrote about what she had learned. That spite was not weakness. It was strength. The strength to say no, the strength to fight back, the strength to make your oppressors pay for every wrong they committed, even if it cost you everything. She did not know if spite was good or evil. Perhaps it was both, perhaps it was neither, but she knew one thing for certain. The galaxy would never be the same. 20 years passed. The galaxy continued to change in ways that the ancient powers could never have predicted. The concept of spite, once unique to humanity, had spread to nearly every corner of known space. It was no longer a human weapon. It was a galactic philosophy. Crystal, now the oldest active member of the diplomatic corps, was asked to write a definitive study of spite and its impact on galactic civilization. She spent 5 years on the project, traveling to hundreds of worlds, interviewing thousands of beings, compiling the largest database of spite-related incidents ever assembled. Her conclusion surprised even her. Spite, she wrote, was not the disease, it was the cure. For thousands of years, the galaxy had been governed by a simple principle: power determines everything. Those with power took what they wanted. Those without power accepted what they were given. It was a system that was stable, efficient, and utterly ruthless. But it was also a system built on a fundamental lie. The lie was that the powerless had no power, that they had no choice but to accept their fate. That resistance was not only futile but irrational. Spite exposed the lie. Spite showed that even the weakest being had power. The power to make their oppressors' victory taste like defeat. The power to turn every conquest into a Pyrrhic one. The power to ensure that no one could take from them without paying a price. The result was paradoxical. As spite spread, the galaxy became less violent. Not because beings had become kinder or more enlightened. They had become afraid that any wrong they committed would be answered with disproportionate retaliation, afraid that every victory would come with a hidden cost, afraid that the being they had wronged today would find a way to make them pay tomorrow. The old empires, built on conquest and exploitation, began to wither, not from external attack, but from internal collapse. Their subject races, emboldened by the example of the Krath's fall, began to resist in ways both large and small. A factory worker who sabotaged one machine per month, a bureaucrat who lost one important document per week, a soldier who hesitated 1 second too long at a crucial moment. None of these acts were enough to provoke serious retaliation, but together, accumulated over years and decades, they ground the machinery of empire to a halt. The cost of maintaining control became greater than the benefits of holding power. New systems began to emerge, systems built not on domination but on negotiation, not on taking but on trading, not on forcing compliance but on building consensus. Not because beings had become better, but because they had learned that the alternative was too costly. Crystal presented her findings to the Council in what would be her final official act. She was old now, even by the standards of her long-lived species. She had spent centuries watching, studying, and learning. Now she wanted to share what she had learned. "We feared spite," she told the assembled representatives. "We saw it as a destructive force, a threat to the stability we had built over millennia, but we were wrong. Spite was not the threat. The threat was a galaxy where the powerful could do whatever they wanted without consequence. Spite created consequences, and consequences created accountability. She paused, gathering her thoughts for what she wanted to say next. Humanity gave us a gift, she continued. Not a pleasant gift, not an easy one, but a necessary one. They showed us that true peace cannot be built on submission. It can only be built on mutual respect and mutual fear. They showed us that the powerless have power if only they are willing to use it. They showed us that there is a force stronger than any army, stronger than any empire, stronger than any weapon. The force of beings who would rather destroy themselves than be destroyed by others. The chamber was silent when she finished, but it was not the silence of fear or confusion. It was the silence of understanding. After the session ended, Crystal made one final visit. She traveled to New Brisbane, now a thriving world again, rebuilt from the ashes of its destruction. The monuments to the fallen still stood, but they were surrounded now by parks and schools and homes. Children played in the shadow of the great memorial, their laughter echoing across the fields where their ancestors had died. She found James Chen there, older now but still recognizable. He was sitting on a bench, watching the children play. He looked up when she approached. "Ambassador Crystal," he said, rising to greet her. "It has been a long time." 20 years, she agreed. "I wanted to thank you before I retire." Chen raised an eyebrow. "Thank me for what?" "For teaching us spite," Crystal said simply. Chen laughed, a sound that was warmer than she remembered. "I did not think I would ever hear those words from a council member." "I did not think I would ever say them," Crystal admitted. "But I have spent 20 years watching what spite has done to the galaxy, and I have come to believe that it was exactly what we needed." Chen was quiet for a moment. Then he gestured to the bench beside him. Sat, her ancient joints creaking in protest. "You know," Chen said slowly, "when we first made contact, I did not think humanity would survive. We were too small, too weak, too primitive. Every projection we made showed us being absorbed or destroyed within a century." "What changed?" Crystal asked. Chen smiled. "Nothing changed. We simply decided that if we were going to be destroyed, we would make sure our destroyers would never forget us. We would make them pay such a price that they would tell stories about us for 1,000 years. We would not go quietly into the darkness." "And instead, you changed everything." "Yes," Chen agreed. "Although not in the way we expected. We thought we would be remembered as the species that fought to the death against impossible odds. Instead, we are remembered as the species that taught the galaxy to fight back." He looked out at the children playing, the next generation of humans growing up in a galaxy that their ancestors had helped reshape. "I think," he said quietly, "that is a better legacy." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the rebuilt city. The sounds of life surrounded them. Laughter, music, the hum of machinery, all the ordinary sounds of a civilization that had been destroyed and reborn. Finally, Crystal spoke again. "Do you have any regrets?" Chen considered the question carefully. "I regret the lives we lost," he said at last. "I regret the suffering we endured. I regret that we had to teach spite to survive." He paused. "But I do not regret teaching it, because the alternative was extinction. And between extinction and spite, I will choose spite every time." Crystal nodded slowly. "I think I finally understand," she said. "Spite is not about hatred. It is about survival. It is about making sure that no one can destroy you without destroying themselves in the process." "Yes," Chen agreed. "That is exactly what it is. Mutual assured destruction on a personal level. The promise that if you come for us, we will make sure you regret it, even if we do not survive to see your regret." He stood slowly, his old bones protesting. "Come," he said, "I want to show you something." He led her to the great memorial at the center of the park. The names of the fallen were carved into walls of black stone, stretching higher than either of them could see. Millions of names, millions of lives, all sacrificed so that humanity could prove a point. "Every one of them knew what they were doing," Chen said softly. "Every one of them chose to fight, Not because they thought they would live, because they wanted the craft to remember, because they wanted the galaxy to see that humanity would not be broken. He touched one name on the wall. "My daughter," he said. "She was 17. She died holding a position that everyone knew would fall. She held it anyway, for 2 days, long enough for the civilians behind her to evacuate." Felt something she had never felt before, something that had no name in her language, a mixture of sorrow and admiration and something else, something deeper. "I am sorry," she said. Chen shook his head. "Do not be sorry. She died doing what she chose to do. She died making sure that her death meant something. She died with spite in her heart and fire in her eyes. That is all any of us can ask for." 100 years later, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. The old empires were gone, replaced by a web of alliances and agreements that would have been unthinkable in the age before spite. War still happened, but it was rare, and it was never one-sided. Everyone knew that even the weakest opponent could make victory too costly to pursue. The Galactic Council still met, but its role had changed. It was no longer an instrument of the powerful, a place where the strong dictated terms to the weak. It had become a forum for negotiation, a place where disputes were resolved through compromise rather than coercion. Not because beings had become noble, but because they had learned that the alternative was mutual destruction. Humanity had changed too. The species that had entered the galactic stage as outcasts and underdogs had become one of the most respected civilizations in known space, not for their technology, which remained modest by galactic standards, not for their military power, which had never been their strength. They were respected for something far more valuable. They were respected because they had proven that respect could not be taken. It had to be earned. The anniversary of New Brisbane was a galactic holiday now. Beings from across the galaxy traveled to the rebuilt world to pay their respects at the monuments and to remember what had happened there. Not just the battle, but what the battle had meant. The moment when the galaxy learned that there was no such thing as a helpless victim. The moment when the old order began to fall. On the centennial of the battle, a delegation from the Galactic Council arrived to dedicate a new memorial. It was the largest structure ever built by joint effort of multiple species, a tower of crystal and light that could be seen from orbit. At its base was a simple inscription, translated into every known language. Here the galaxy learned that the spirit cannot be conquered. The dedication ceremony was attended by representatives from over 4,000 species. They stood together in the shadow of the memorial, enemies and allies alike, united by the shared understanding of what this place represented. The speaker was a young human woman named Sarah Chen, the great-great-granddaughter of Ambassador James Chen. She looked out at the assembled crowd, her voice carrying across the memorial grounds. 100 years ago, she began, my ancestors stood on this ground and refused to surrender. They knew they could not win. They knew they would probably die, but they fought anyway, not for victory, not for survival. They fought because someone had told them they did not matter. They fought to prove that they did. She paused, looking around at the faces watching her. Beings of every shape and size and origin, all of them listening. The galaxy called it spite, she continued. And they were right. It was spite. Pure, burning, irrational spite. The refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. The determination to make our enemies pay a price for every inch of ground, every life, every moment of suffering they inflicted on us. But spite is not just about destruction. It is about dignity. It is about saying that you matter, that your suffering matters, that no one has the right to hurt you without consequence. It is about standing up when everything tells you to lie down. It is about fighting when everything tells you to submit. My ancestors did not intend to change the galaxy. They only intended to not be forgotten. They only wanted to make sure that their deaths meant something, that their enemies would remember them with fear instead of contempt. They were willing to die for that simple dignity. and in doing so, they changed everything. She gestured to the assembled crowd. Look around you. 100 years ago, this gathering would have been impossible. The strong would not have stood beside the weak. The conquerors would not have mourned with the conquered. But here you are. Here we all are, together. Not because we have become better beings, but because we have learned that we must be. We have learned that treating others with contempt has consequences. We have learned that every being has the power to make their oppressor pay. That is the legacy of New Brisbane. That is what humanity gave to the galaxy. Not technology, not power, not wisdom. We gave you spite. And with it, we gave you the understanding that you are never truly helpless, that you always have a choice, that you can always make them pay. She took a deep breath, her voice softening. My great-great-grandfather told Ambassador Crixtal that spite was the greatest weapon humanity ever created. He was right, but he was also wrong. Spite is not a weapon. It is a promise that no matter how weak you are, no matter how hopeless your situation seems, you can still choose to fight. You can still choose to matter. You can still choose to make your enemy remember you. The galaxy learned to fear spite, and in learning to fear it, the galaxy learned something far more important. It learned to respect the beings who had it. It learned that every life has value, because every life has the potential to make its end meaningful. That is why we are here today, not to celebrate destruction, not to glorify violence. We are here to remember that the spirit cannot be conquered, that dignity cannot be taken, that no being is ever truly helpless. We are here to remember the lesson of New Brisbane, the lesson that my ancestors taught the Krath, that the Krath subject races taught the galaxy, that the galaxy will teach to every species yet to come. She looked up at the memorial, its crystal spire catching the light of the setting sun. Never surrender, never submit, never let them think they can hurt you without consequence. That is spite, that is humanity, and that is what the galaxy learned to fear. The ceremony ended in silence, but it was not the silence of fear or confusion. It was the silence of respect. 4,000 species, standing together in the fading light, honoring the memory of beings who had refused to be forgotten. Above them, the memorial tower glowed with captured starlight, a beacon visible across the planet, a reminder that somewhere, sometime, a species had decided that being powerless did not mean being without power, that being defeated did not mean being without dignity, that being small did not mean being without significance. The galaxy had learned to fear spite, and in learning to fear it, the galaxy had learned to be better. That was humanity's gift to the stars, not technology, not wisdom, not power. Just the simple, burning truth that every being matters, that every life has value, that no one can take your dignity unless you let them, and that if they try, you can always make them pay.